This lounge is reserved for legitimate clients. Vanessa Reynolds didn't even blink when she said it. Her voice sliced through the quiet like a blade cutting silk. At 9:43 a.m. on a humid Atlanta morning, inside the granite-floored executive client lounge of Apex Financial, those 7 words landed like thunder, and they struck Zara Okafor hard. Not because she believed them, but because she had anticipated them. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long rectangles across the polished stone floor. A faint scent of vanilla and sandalwood hung in the air, the bank's signature fragrance, pumped through hidden vents to create an atmosphere of luxury and exclusivity. The gentle hum of hushed conversations paused momentarily as Vanessa's words cut through the refined ambience. Before we continue further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who didn't know you owned the building they worked in? If this story resonates with you, click that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because in the next 10 minutes, everything you believe about authority, prejudice, and banking will transform. Right here in this very lounge, Zara Okafor, 47 years old, entered the branch wearing charcoal dress pants, a soft cream blouse, and simple black flats. She didn't look like the CEO of Pinnacle Global, the multi-billion-dollar corporation that had acquired Apex Financial just 28 months earlier. That was intentional. This morning was a test. She had spent the previous evening preparing for today. After a late dinner with her executive team discussing the troubling pattern of complaints from this particular branch, she had made her decision. I need to see it firsthand, she had told them. Sometimes you need to experience the problem to truly understand its depth. Her COO had protested. It was risky, potentially inflammatory, but Zara had simply smiled. The greatest risks often yield the most meaningful changes, she had replied. She carried no entourage, no designer handbag, no flashy jewelry. Just a slim tablet case and a quiet confidence that radiated from within. She approached the reception desk and requested access to the executive lounge to complete a $5,000 withdrawal. The teller directed her to the crystal-walled room without asking a single question. The executive lounge was designed to impress. Plush leather chairs in varying shades of cream and taupe were arranged in small conversational groupings. Original artwork, mostly abstract pieces in blues and golds, adorned the walls. A refreshment bar with premium coffee, sparkling water, and fresh pastries stood in one corner, while a digital stock ticker scrolled silently along the back wall. It was a space engineered to make wealth feel comfortable and protected. But the moment she settled into a chair, that tranquility shattered. Vanessa Reynolds, the branch manager, strode over like she detected smoke and was hunting for the fire. Her blonde bob swayed as she leaned across the polished oak desk. "We'll need verification of your fund sources," she stated. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were ice. Zara didn't flinch. She'd witnessed this before. The same expression she received at 24 when her account was frozen for unusual activity after depositing her first commercial property commission. The same look at 27 when a loan officer labeled her high risk despite offering 35% more collateral than required. And now, 2 decades and $9 billion later, here it was again. The familiar sensation washed over her. That peculiar mixture of disappointment and resolve that had become an unwelcome companion throughout her career. She had hoped things had changed. They hadn't. Zara calmly opened her tablet, navigated to a document, and moved to slide it across the table before Vanessa could even glance at it. "Don't hold up the line, sweetheart." Trevor Whitman, 44, a white investment banker in an expensive navy suit, sneered as he walked past. With one casual flick of his wrist, he knocked Zara's tablet off the desk. It landed on the floor with a soft thud but a loud insult. The tablet skidded across the polished granite, coming to rest near the leg of a nearby chair. No screen crack, thankfully, but the gesture itself was a fracture, a deliberate act designed to put her in her place. Several clients glanced up, then quickly away, as if witnessing something both uncomfortable and unremarkable. Zara stared at him, composed and controlled. Trevor didn't even look back. He continued toward the private consultation rooms, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor, each step a declaration of his presumed importance. Heather Wilson, 30, a private banker, stood at the far corner, arms crossed. That amount of cash doesn't make sense. It could be stolen money. Her words weren't shouted but carried across the room. Two clients looked up. One raised an eyebrow. Another whispered. To his companion, the accusation hung in the air, invisible but heavy. The word stolen seemed to echo, though it had only been said once. Zara felt the weight of eyes on her. Some curious, some suspicious, some deliberately averted. This, too, was familiar. The assumption that success and wealth, when attached to someone who looked like her, must be illegitimate. Zara blinked slowly. Then she stated, cool and measured, run my identification. Vanessa shook her head. You're not properly verified. This isn't a walk-in facility. I have an account here, Zara replied, her voice maintaining its even tone. Check your system. We have protocols, Vanessa countered, her posture stiffening. And you don't appear to be following them. In the back corner, Dae-hyun Kim, a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur, began recording with his phone. The red light glowed, casting a quiet spotlight on the room's dissolving professionalism. He had been watching the exchange unfold for several minutes, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to conviction as he finally raised his device. Don't, Zara said firmly, her voice still calm. We resolve this with facts, not footage. A tall black man in a charcoal suit, Jabari Washington, 41, rose from his chair and approached Dae-hyun. Brother, he said quietly, lower that down. This is bigger than one video. It's about how we speak up, not how we go viral. Jabari stood with the quiet authority of someone who had navigated these waters before. His suit was impeccable, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes gleaming. The armor of a black professional who understood that excellence was the minimum requirement for mere acceptance. Dae-hyun hesitated. Zara met his eyes. Words, she said. Use your words. The room stilled momentarily. Aaliyah Bennett, 29, sat silently to Zara's left, hands gripping her purse, lips pressed together in anger. She finally whispered, "This is wrong." Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the strap of her designer bag, a gift to herself when she had landed her first executive role. She recognized what was happening because it had happened to her too, though perhaps not as brazenly. The questioning looks, the extra verification steps, the surprise when credentials were confirmed. Zara turned her head. "Speak up," she said. "Let them hear it." Aaliyah stood. "She's not the problem. You are," she said, pointing at Vanessa and Heather. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of containing a righteous anger that had been building for years. "I've been banking here for 5 years, and I've watched this happen too many times. You're not protecting this institution, you're poisoning it." Heather raised an eyebrow, unmoved. "Security is on standby," she muttered, one hand hovering near the silent alarm button beneath the counter. Her fingers tapped restlessly against the polished wood, as if eager to escalate the situation. Around the lounge, other clients began to shift uncomfortably. Some pretended to focus on their phones or tablets, avoiding eye contact. Others watched openly, gauging which way the wind would blow, calculating whether to speak or remain silent. The invisible calculations of privilege and risk played out. Across every face, Trevor, now leaning against a nearby column, smirked. "You all seriously think this woman has $500,000 sitting in an account here?" he said, half laughing. "The cash advance store is down the street." He slid a folded note across the marble floor. It skidded to a stop at Zara's foot. The note made a soft scratching sound as it traveled across the polished floor, a small sound that somehow emphasized the magnitude of the insult. It was not simply the suggestion that she didn't belong. It was the casual cruelty with which the suggestion was delivered. Aaliyah bent down, picked it up, and read it aloud. "Try the cash advance store." A collective gasp followed. One elderly, white woman clutched her handbag tighter. A young Latino father with a toddler looked up from his phone. Two women in business attire exchanged glances of disbelief. The room was no longer quiet. It was buzzing with tension, discomfort, and the uncertain energy that precedes change. "That's enough," Zara said, voice rising but still controlled. "You're damaging this institution with every word leaving your mouth." Her words carried the weight of authority, not the kind that comes from a title, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. It was the voice of someone who had built something substantial, something lasting, something that mattered. Vanessa smirked, clearly enjoying the power play. You're not a client, you're a con artist. Go play wealthy somewhere else. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, toxic, clouding the space between them. Behind Vanessa, another client shook his head slightly, his expression troubled. An older gentleman near the window lowered his newspaper, watching with growing concern. Zara took a breath, pulled out her phone and dialed. Priya, she said, initiate Protocol 6. On the other end, Priya Patel, her executive assistant, responded without hesitation. It's ready, ma'am. Protocol 6 was not merely a corporate procedure. It was a strategy developed after Zara's third acquisition, a systematic response to the institutional bias she had encountered repeatedly throughout her career. It included documentation, escalation, paths, and contingency measures designed to address discrimination at its root. Today would be its most significant test. You're going to regret this, Zara said. Not because I'll yell, not because I'll share a video, but because you just told the wrong woman she doesn't belong in the bank she owns. Her words didn't carry threat, they carried promise. Not the promise of vengeance, but the promise of accountability, a reckoning long overdue. The distinction was subtle but profound, Vanessa scoffed. Delusions don't intimidate me. She crossed her arms, a gesture of dismissal that betrayed her growing unease. Something in Zara's calm confidence had planted a seed of doubt, but Vanessa was committed to her course now. Too committed to back down. Even as uncertainty began to creep in, Dahyun raised his phone again. Jabari stepped forward. We handle this properly. No videos, no edits. We talk. He positioned himself as a mediator, not taking sides but taking a stand for process, for fairness, for dignity. His presence alone altered the dynamic of the room, a reminder that witnessing without acting is its own form of complicity. Trevor rolled his eyes. Security now. His voice carried the expectation of immediate compliance, the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. It was the reflexive command of privilege, the assumption of authority even when none had been. Granted, Vanessa nodded at Heather, who picked up a landline receiver. Calling now, she said. She's a fraud. The word fraud echoed in the high-ceilinged room. A client near the coffee station shook his head and mumbled something under his breath. An older woman collecting her banking papers paused, her expression troubled. The atmosphere shifted again, tension building like pressure in a sealed container. Zara didn't move, didn't flinch. She maintained her composure with the same steadiness that once guided her when her first property deal nearly collapsed due to a fraudulent title, the same steadiness that had carried her through 16 acquisitions and a global economic crisis. But now it wasn't just her credentials or assets being questioned. It was her very existence in this space, this lounge, this institution. The challenge was fundamental, existential, a challenge to her right to occupy space, to conduct business, to exist without explanation or apology to SO. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to ask, if you were told to leave a place you owned, would you go? Or would you do what Zara did? Sit down, stay calm, and let the storm come to you? Because the storm had already begun. She's a fraud, Raymond. Remove her. Vanessa Reynolds didn't whisper. She commanded it loud enough for the entire executive client lounge to hear, as if volume could drown out guilt. Her voice carried an edge of desperation now, the heightened tone of someone who feels control slipping away and responds by doubling down. Each word was over-enunciated, as if clarity could compensate for correctness. Security lead Raymond Collins, 49, stepped forward reluctantly. His hands were stiff at his sides. His uniform, navy blue with gold accents, seemed to hang differently on him now, as if the weight of what he was being asked to do had physically altered his bearing. This woman, Vanessa continued, her voice rising with every syllable, is a con artist pretending she owns the place. The irony of her words hung in the air, unacknowledged but palpable. Several clients exchanged glances. A woman in a red blazer shook her head slightly. An older gentleman near the water dispenser set down his cup, his attention fully captured by the unfolding scene. Zara Okafor turned her head slowly, unwavering. She didn't speak yet. The light from the windows caught the subtle highlights in her dark hair, illuminating her profile as she regarded Vanessa with a gaze that was neither angry nor pleading, simply assessing the granite floors, the crystal glass, the recessed lighting. None of it softened the air now thick with tension. The lounge no longer felt exclusive. It felt like a courtroom. Every element of its design, intended to convey prosperity and security, now seemed to amplify the confrontation, the soft lighting highlighting every expression, the acoustic design carrying every word to every corner. Trevor Whitman added. Fuel, standing tall in his suit, jaw set. She stole that money and now she's here wasting everyone's time. Why hasn't she been arrested? That word, stole, hit like shrapnel. Two clients near the coffee station exchanged glances, whispering. One raised their phone slightly, but reconsidered. A young woman in business casual attire shook her head slightly, her expression a mixture of disgust and resignation, as if witnessing something shameful but not surprising. Heather Wilson, still, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, narrowed her eyes and said confidently, "That's illegitimate cash. No real client makes that kind of request, not dressed like that." The focus on Zara's clothing, simple, elegant, but not ostentatious, revealed more about Heather than it did about Zara. It exposed a worldview where wealth must announce itself loudly, where worth is measured in logos and labels, where belonging is determined by external markers rather than intrinsic value. Zara, still seated, absorbed the comment. Her outfit, tailored pants, simple blouse, practical flats. It wasn't the armor these people expected from a millionaire, but it was intentional. It was authentic. It was deliberate. She had long ago learned that true confidence needs no advertisement. That real power speaks in whispers, not shouts. Aaliyah Bennett stood up from her chair, voice shaking but clear. Enough. You're all out of line. You don't even know her. Her intervention was brave, a moment of solidarity that carried risk. As a black woman herself, Aaliyah was putting her own standing in this space on the line, challenging not just the immediate situation but the unspoken rules that governed it. Trevor laughed. We know the type. She probably got someone's login information and thinks she can just walk in here and withdraw $500,000 like it's nothing. His dismissal was casual, reflexive, the easy arrogance of someone who has never had his right to occupy space questioned. He smoothed his tie, a gesture that seemed to reassure himself of his own legitimacy even as he challenged Zara's. Gregory Parker, the assistant manager, shifted uncomfortably. His lips parted as if wanting to speak. He didn't. His silence was its own kind of statement. The uncomfortable neutrality of someone who recognizes injustice but calculates that the personal cost of addressing it is too high. Daehyun Kim, still holding his phone just low enough to appear discreet, looked to Zara. I should be documenting this. He spoke softly but clearly, a techie's instinctive response to a moment that demanded recording, demanded evidence. In his world, documentation was protection, truth was data, and justice required a clear audit trail. Zara shook her head. Words, not cameras. Her response was not a rejection of evidence, but a commitment to something more fundamental. The power of direct human communication, the importance of bearing witness with one's full presence, not filtered through a lens. Jabari Washington stood beside her, moving closer to Daehyun. Let your voice work, not your technology. If we want to change the room, we speak in it, not post about it afterward. His words carried the wisdom of experience, an understanding that while social media could amplify a moment, it could not create the human connection necessary for genuine change. That required presence, voice, courage in the moment rather than commentary after the fact. Daehyun hesitated. You're right, but this doesn't seem real. The unreality of the moment was striking, the brazenness of the bias, the openness of the hostility, the absence of even a pretense of professionalism. It felt like a scene from another era, yet it was unfolding in real time, in a space of supposed sophistication and advancement. Aaliyah looked around. This is how they treat us. The simplicity of her statement carried the weight of accumulated experience, not just her own, but the collective experience of countless others who had stood where she stood, faced what she faced, endured what she endured. Her us encompassed more than just those present. It reached back through generations. Heather took a sharp breath. You're creating a scene. The accusation was classic inversion, blaming the victim for responding to mistreatment, rather than acknowledging the mistreatment itself. It was a tactic as old as injustice. Frame the response to harm as more problematic than the harm itself. Zara's voice cut through everything like a thread of steel. You called security on me for existing. That's the only scene here. Her words were precise, incisive, cutting through pretense to name exactly what was happening. Not a misunderstanding, not a procedural confusion, but a fundamental challenge to her right to exist in this space without question or challenge. Gregory finally spoke, voice low, eyes to the floor. Do you have any account verification? The words stumbled out like they were dragging shame behind them. His question was an attempt at de-escalation, but it came too late, offered too tentatively to counterbalance the hostility that had already filled the room. It was the hesitant intervention of someone trying to salvage professionalism after Aloe. His question was an attempt at de-escalation, but it came too late, offered too tentatively to counterbalance the hostility that had already filled the room. It was the hesitant intervention of someone trying to salvage professionalism after allowing it to be thoroughly compromised. Zara didn't look at him. She dialed Priya Patel. Priya, they've escalated it. Proceed to Phase 2 of Protocol 6. Protocol 6 was moving into its next stage, from documentation to action. Each element had been carefully designed, not in anger, but in foresight, not for revenge, but for reform. It was the culmination of lessons learned through years of navigating spaces designed to exclude. Priya's voice came through, steady and efficient. Confirmed. I've documented the escalation and noted the language used. Also, Vanessa's call to security is timestamped. Internal audit will review this. Priya's response reflected months of preparation, systems put in place precisely for moments like this. Her efficiency wasn't cold. It was purposeful. Each documented word another brick in the foundation of accountability that Zara was methodically building. Zara replied, "They'll hear everything, every word." Her statement wasn't a threat, it was a promise of transparency. In spaces where discrimination thrives in shadows, light is the most effective disinfectant. Every word spoken, every action taken would be brought into that light, not for shame, but for change. Gregory straightened slightly, caught between two worlds, his loyalty to Vanessa and the truth unraveling around him. His posture reflected his inner conflict, the professional discomfort of someone realizing they may have chosen the wrong side. Vanessa waved him off. Don't engage with this. She's just here to cause disruption. Her dismissal was becoming more desperate, her control more visibly fragile. What had begun as confident rejection was transforming into defensive deflection as the dynamic of the room shifted imperceptibly but undeniably away from her authority. Trevor chimed in again. She's probably filming some social media stunt, trying to play victim for views. His accusation revealed a particular worldview, one where claims of discrimination are perceived as performance rather than reality, where calling out injustice is seen as seeking attention rather than seeking change. It was a perspective that conveniently absolved him of any responsibility to examine his own actions. Daehyun stepped forward now, forgetting the phone. She's not filming. I was. But I stopped because she asked us to speak, not record. Maybe. Try listening for once. His intervention marked a shift in his own understanding, from passive documentation to active participation. The technology in his hand had become less important than the truth in his voice. Heather's voice cracked slightly. Security's coming. Let them handle this. The slight break in her composure was telling. The first hairline fracture in her professional veneer. Something in the changing energy of the room had penetrated her certainty, planting a seed of doubt she was trying desperately to ignore. Aaliyah didn't sit. Security for what? A withdrawal? Her question laid bare the absurdity at the heart of the situation. The invocation of security against a client attempting a routine transaction. It highlighted not just the overreaction, but the underlying assumptions that fueled it. Vanessa raised her voice again. You're all being manipulated. You think someone like her walks in off the street and has access to $500,000? Wake up. The phrase someone like her hung in the air, unelaborated but unmistakable in its implication. It was the kind of coded language that maintains plausible deniability while conveying clear meaning to those who understand its subtext. Zara turned to face her fully now. You sound afraid. That's the sound of your job slipping away. Her observation was astute, identifying not just the emotion but its source. Vanessa's escalating responses weren't about procedure or security. They were about perceived threat to her position, her authority, her control over this space, and who belonged in it. Vanessa hissed. Threats? That's your approach now. The accusation of threatening behavior was another inversion, attributing to Zara the very tactic Vanessa herself was employing. It was deflection as defense, accusation as shield. Zara didn't blink. No, just a mirror. Her response was powerful in its simplicity, refusing to accept the projection, returning responsibility to its source. She wasn't creating this situation. She was reflecting it back to those who were. Priya's voice returned over the phone. Zara, I've elevated the incident to our corporate ethics board. They're monitoring live, and we've documented every biased phrase spoken within the last 4 minutes. I've also linked the 2023 Pinnacle acquisition documents to your profile file for real-time verification. Each word from Priya represented another system activating, another level of accountability engaging. What had begun as a lone woman facing discrimination was revealing itself as something much more structured, a prepared response to an anticipated problem. Zara nodded once. Keep the line open. Her instruction was calm but deliberate, maintaining the connection that was now serving as both witness and record. In that moment, her phone wasn't just a device. It was a lifeline to systems she had built precisely for moments like this. Vanessa scoffed. Corporate won't save your little scheme. Her dismissal betrayed a fundamental misunderstanding of what was unfolding. She was still operating as if this were a confrontation between a branch manager and a would-be fraudster, not realizing she was actually facing the architect of the very corporate structure she was invoking. Gregory turned slowly, his voice hollow. Vanessa, what if she's right? His question represented the first significant crack in the united front, the moment when doubt began to solidify into concern. It was tentative but telling, a small voice of reason finally finding expression. Vanessa stared at him like he'd just betrayed her family. Don't be naive. Her sharp response revealed fear disguised as certainty, the desperate attempt to maintain control by shutting down any voice that might challenge her narrative. But the cracks were showing, widening with each passing moment. Zara stood now, steady and calm. You asked for proof of funds. You accused me of fraud. You called me a thief. You triggered a security response. You mocked my attire, and you humiliated me in a room full of witnesses. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. And I'm still standing here. Why do you think that is? Her question hung in the air, not rhetorical, but genuinely inviting reflection. It offered a moment of potential realization, a chance for those involved to recognize the significance of her continued composure in the face of such treatment. The silence in the room was immediate. Even Trevor folded his arms tighter, lips pressed together. The air seemed to thicken with unspoken understanding as the implications of her question registered across different faces in different ways, some with dawning realization, others with growing unease. Aaliyah walked to Zara's side. What now? Her question was simple but profound, acknowledging that a threshold had been crossed, that what happened next would matter not just for this moment, but beyond it. It was the question that follows recognition and precedes action. Zara said, wait. The truth is coming whether they want it or not. Her patience wasn't passive, it was strategic. She understood that systems take time to engage, that justice sometimes moves at its own pace, and that the most powerful position in this moment was one of certainty rather than urgency. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Her accusation rang hollow now, the desperate attempt of someone sensing the ground shifting beneath them but refusing to acknowledge it. The confidence in her voice had been replaced by a brittle edge of uncertainty. Trevor barked. If she had money, she'd show it. You people always act entitled until someone asks for verification. His "you people" was a tell, the mask slipping to reveal the bias beneath. In moments of stress, carefully maintained veneers often crack, exposing the attitudes they were designed to conceal. Jabari turned sharply. You people? The words echoed. His repetition of the phrase hung in the air, Not a question requiring answer, but a spotlight illuminating what had been said. It was a moment of calling out, of refusing to let casual bigotry pass unremarked. Gregory sat down in one of the lounge chairs. This isn't how we should treat people. His statement, though belated, marked an important shift from complicity to conscience, from going along to standing apart. It was a small step, but a significant one, a recognition that professional loyalty does not require moral compromise. Heather rolled her eyes. It's called procedure. Her dismissal attempted to reframe discrimination as protocol, prejudice as process. It was the bureaucratization of bias, hiding behind rules and regulations to avoid confronting the attitudes that shape their application. Zara spoke to Priya again. Have you initiated phase 3? The structured nature of her response continued to unfold, not a reactive outburst, but a methodical implementation of pre-established protocols designed to address exactly this kind of situation. Priya replied, already underway. Vanessa's compliance reports are being pulled, and just for the record, 9 of her prior service complaints involved women of color, all filed as unverified and never escalated. It's not a good pattern. The revelation of this pattern was significant, transforming an isolated incident into evidence of systemic issues. What might have been dismissed as a misunderstanding was now revealing itself as part of a documented pattern of behavior. Zara closed her eyes briefly, absorbing that. She had known, but hearing it laid out so clearly still affected her deeply. Thank you, Priya. Continue. Her momentary pause wasn't weakness. It was humanity, the natural response of someone confronting the reality that what she was experiencing wasn't exceptional but routine. It was a moment of personal impact within a professional response. Aaliyah's voice cracked. They're trying to erase us with policy, with tone, with fake concern for security. Her observation cut to the heart of the matter, identifying not just the what but the how of discrimination. Not overt rejection, but procedural obstruction. Not explicit bias, but implied unworthiness. Not direct exclusion, but indirect erasure. Zara placed a hand on her shoulder. Not today. Her simple response carried the weight of promise, not just for this moment, but for the future it represented. It was a statement of boundary, of limit, of this far and no further. Vanessa smirked. You think your little phone call and a few tech terms are going to change anything? Her dismissal underestimated both the preparation behind Zara's response and the systems now engaging because of it. What appeared to her as improvisation was in fact carefully orchestrated action. Zara's gaze sharpened. No, but I'm not here to change everything. I'm here to end this branch's legacy of silence. Her purpose was specific, focused, not grandiose transformation, but targeted intervention. It reflected an understanding that meaningful change often begins in particular places with particular people addressing particular problems. Daehyun murmured. Wow. His simple expression of admiration reflected a shifting perspective from observer to ally, from documenter to participant. It was the response of someone witnessing not just confrontation, but courage. Jabari nodded slowly. And this is why we don't record. Because when people speak truth like this, it doesn't need filtering. His observation highlighted something profound about authentic moments of justice. They carry their own power, their own clarity, their own undeniable truth that no additional medium can enhance. Suddenly, Heather stepped toward Zara and picked up the fallen tablet from earlier. She held it in both hands, looked down at it. Then, without a word, she tossed it to the side where it skidded across the floor and hit the base of a leather chair. Stolen junk, she muttered. The act was petty, unnecessary, a last grasp at power through small cruelty. It revealed not strength, but weakness, not authority, but insecurity. Zara's eyes narrowed. Was that yours to destroy, or just your impulse to control? Her question went beyond the immediate action to its underlying motivation, identifying not just the behavior, but its psychological source. It was incisive, cutting through action to intention. Heather turned her back. Gregory watched her walk away and shook his head. She's gone too far. His assessment marked another shift in the room's dynamic, another voice acknowledging the inappropriateness of what was unfolding. It was the beginning of something important, accountability within the ranks. And in that moment, Zara spoke again. Every second you spend talking instead of reflecting is a second closer to the end of your employment. Her statement wasn't a threat. It was a reality check, a reminder that actions have consequences, that accountability isn't negotiable, that professional conduct matters. It carried the authority not of anger, but of position. Vanessa's smile faded. You think you're some kind of hero? Her question attempted to reframe Zara's professional response as personal ego, another deflection, another attempt to shift focus from her own actions to Zara's motives. Zara's tone sharpened. No, I'm your reckoning. Her response was powerful, in its directness, claiming not virtue but function. She wasn't positioning herself as savior but as consequence, not as moral superior but as necessary correction to a broken system. Call the police. She's a financial threat. Heather Wilson didn't hesitate. She picked up the landline receiver and dialed quickly, her voice loud enough for the whole lounge to hear as she said, "Yes, we have a woman here attempting to withdraw funds under false pretenses. Large amount, possibly stolen." She didn't stutter. She sounded practiced, like this wasn't her first time. The ease with which she escalated the situation to law enforcement revealed something troubling about standard operating procedure. The reflexive criminalization of behaviors that, in other clients, would be considered routine. Zara Okafor sat motionless in the center of the client lounge. Her hands folded over her tablet, eyes fixed forward, voice quiet but sharp. You just made a federal false report. I hope you're prepared to explain it in court. Her response identified not just the ethical but the legal implications of Heather's action. It wasn't emotional but factual, naming the potential consequences of false reporting to law enforcement. Vanessa Reynolds scoffed, arms folded as she leaned beside the coffee machine. Sweetheart, that's not how this works. We protect the institution, not the imposters. Her words were laced with contempt, not caution. Her invocation of institutional protection revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what institutions are for, conflating protection of systems with protection of privilege, defense of process, with defense of prejudice. Then she turned to Gregory Parker, the assistant manager. Get her out now. Her command was losing its authority with each repetition, becoming less instruction and more desperation as control of the situation continued to slip away from her. Gregory didn't move. His eyes flicked toward Zara, then to Heather, then back to Vanessa. She hasn't even raised her voice, he muttered. That's what worries you, isn't it? His observation was perceptive, identifying what truly threatened Vanessa about Zara's presence. Not disruption but composure, not aggression but confidence, not disorder but dignified challenge to an unjust order. Trevor Whitman stepped forward, shoving his hands in his pockets, trying to fill the room with his presence. She's laundering money. That's obvious. What else do you need? He waved a platinum-colored business card in the air like it meant something. And I'm supposed to be in the vault consultation. I'm a priority client. His voice was harsh, his tone theatrical. This woman is nothing. This is all theater. His intervention was revealing, the assumption that his status entitled him to priority, that his assessment of others carried weight, that his impatience justified their removal. It was privilege personified, entitlement embodied. Vanessa suddenly stepped behind Zara's chair and demanded, "Show me your financial history right now. If you're legitimate, prove it. Open your account in front of everyone." The tone wasn't procedural. It was taunting. Her demand represented a fundamental violation of banking protocol, asking a client to publicly display financial information as a form of humiliation rather than verification. It revealed that this was no longer about security or procedure. It was about power and public shaming. Zara didn't move. She lifted her head slowly, then looked to the entryway as footsteps echoed in. The security lead, Raymond Collins, 34, had arrived. He wore a Navy uniform with an Apex Financial badge stitched above his chest. "What's happening here?" he asked. His question seemed neutral, but his posture wasn't. Already positioned closer to the staff than to Zara, already aligned physically with one side of the dispute before understanding its nature. Heather pointed directly at Zara. "She's a suspected fraud. We've requested verification. She's refused. And now she's escalating the situation with her phone." Her framing was strategic, presenting Zara as both uncooperative and threatening, casting reasonable resistance to unreasonable treatment as aggression rather than self-defense. Raymond nodded and walked over, then stood directly in front of Zara's seat. "I need your bag and your tablet." He didn't ask. He reached. His immediate physical intimidation, without investigation, without verification, without even basic fact-finding, revealed how quickly procedure could become pretext, how easily authority could become aggression. When Zara didn't immediately comply, Raymond shoved her purse off the adjacent seat and onto the floor. You're being detained for noncompliance. The escalation to physical contact, however indirect, marked a dangerous boundary crossed. What had begun as verbal challenge had now transformed into physical intimidation, all under the guise of professional procedure. Jabari Washington, still standing near the center of the room, stepped forward. That is not legal. She hasn't violated a single law. His intervention was both moral and factual, identifying not just the ethical problem, but the legal one. Security personnel in private establishments have limited authority, and detention for non-criminal matters exceeds those limits. Aaliyah Bennett grabbed her phone but didn't record. She simply gripped it, trembling. This is what happens, she whispered, even when you sit quietly. Her observation captured something profound about the nature of the experience. That compliance doesn't guarantee fair treatment, that respectability doesn't ensure respect, that the problem isn't behavior but perception. Zara's eyes locked on Raymond's face. Touch me again, and I will personally ensure Apex Financial pays for it. Her warning wasn't emotional but contractual, identifying specific action and specific consequence. It wasn't a threat but a promise of accountability for crossing clear professional and legal boundaries. Raymond raised an eyebrow, amused. Lady, I don't care what you threaten. You don't belong here. Those 5 words cut deeper than anything else. You don't belong here. They revealed the heart of the matter. Not concern about funds or fraud, but fundamental challenge to presence, to existence in the space, to the right to be without explanation or justification. Jabari moved to stand between them. Step back. Man. His physical intervention matched the escalation of the moment, recognizing that words alone might no longer be sufficient as the situation continued to intensify. Raymond held firm. You interfering now? His question attempted to reframe Jabari's protection as interference, another inversion that cast defense against aggression as the true aggression. I'm protecting a client, Jabari said, standing his ground. His response was clear, professional, recentering the fundamental relationship that should govern this interaction. Not suspected criminal and enforcer, but client and service provider. Daehyun stood from the corner, holding his phone higher now. This needs to be witnessed. His return to documentation reflected the escalating nature of the situation, recognition that as physical boundaries were being crossed, the need for objective record increased. Zara's voice cracked, not from fear, but fury. Daehyun, don't. We don't need their eyes. We need their ears. Even in this moment of heightened tension, her strategy remained consistent, focused on direct accountability rather than external pressure, on immediate change rather than future virality. Daehyun lowered his phone, swallowing hard. Then speak louder. His response acknowledged both her preference and the reality of the moment, recognizing that if recording was off the table, then vocal presence must intensify. Zara turned to Vanessa and spoke deliberately. You demand my history like I owe you my identity, but I don't owe this room anything. I've earned more than anyone here, including you. So instead of asking where my money came from, maybe ask why you believe you have the right to question it. Her statement went beyond the immediate situation to its underlying assumption, challenging not just the treatment, but the worldview that enabled it. Not just the action, but the attitude behind it. That moment, Priya Patel's voice came through. The phone in Zara's hand, steady and resolute. Zara, Protocol 6 is now fully active. Pinnacle's compliance board has flagged Vanessa's employee record. They're pulling the 2023 audit logs. I've also linked Trevor's prior formal warning for verbal misconduct. One more incident, and corporate will suspend his client privileges. Each word from Priya represented another system engaging, another level of accountability activating. What had appeared to the branch staff as an isolated confrontation was revealing itself as a carefully monitored intervention with documented history and institutional backing. Zara didn't smile. She just nodded. Let it all proceed. Her instruction reflected confidence in the system she had built, trust that they would function as designed, that the mechanisms of accountability she had put in place would now serve their intended purpose. Vanessa leaned forward, almost growling. You won't get away with this. Her accusation had lost its power, reduced from authoritative dismissal to desperate defense as the situation continued to shift around her. Zara replied, You mean being black, wealthy and patient? I've managed it for 20 years. Her response identified exactly what was at issue: the intersection of race, class, and power that made her presence in this space so challenging to those who believed they controlled access to it. Gregory backed away from the cluster forming near Zara's seat, mumbling, This is not what I signed up for. His statement reflected growing recognition of the gap between professional expectations and current reality, between what banking should be and what it had become in this branch under this leadership. Heather gripped the phone tighter as she continued speaking with dispatch, giving her name clearly, spelling out possible financial criminal present, with no sense of irony. Her commitment to the escalation path she had chosen was unwavering, even as evidence mounted that it was not just inappropriate, but potentially career-ending. Clients around the lounge began to murmur louder. An elderly man near the window stood and shook his head. This is ridiculous, he said. The public reaction was shifting from uncomfortable observation to active assessment, from silent witness to vocal judgment. The court of opinion within the lounge was beginning to render its verdict at a young black couple nearby took each other's hands. The simple gesture spoke volumes: recognition, solidarity, shared understanding of what was unfolding and what it meant beyond this moment. Then came the crack. Gregory's voice, low but clear, I need to say something. His intervention marked a critical turning point, the moment when complicity fractures, when silent disagreement becomes vocal dissent, when the unified front begins to crumble from within. All eyes turned. Vanessa, Heather, what we're doing is wrong. His statement was simple but profound, a clear moral assessment from someone inside the system, an acknowledgement of ethical failure from a participant rather than an observer. That Vanessa's eyes went wide. Don't you dare. Her warning revealed fear, recognition that internal dissent was potentially more damaging than external challenge, that criticism from within carried weight, that criticism from without could not match. Gregory looked at the floor. Heather wanted the police here. She didn't even run the verification. She refused to check the system. She said bringing them in would shut her down fast. His revelation was damning, exposing not just mistake, but intent, not just error, but strategy. It transformed the narrative from procedural misstep to deliberate targeting. Heather gasped. You liar. Her denial was reflexive but unconvincing, the desperate attempt to maintain credibility even as it was being irreparably damaged by insider testimony. Gregory nodded once. I was there. You said it. And you said it knowing who she might be. His affirmation was calm, certain, the statement of someone who has crossed a threshold and now stands firmly on the other side, no longer willing to participate in or protect a system he recognizes as wrong. Trevor shouted, You're turning on your team for her? She's bluffing. His accusation framed ethical action as team betrayal, revealing a worldview where loyalty trumps integrity, where protecting colleagues matters more than upholding principles. Zara stood slowly, then called the bluff. She lifted her voice, finally, powerfully. I am Zara Okafor, CEO of Pinnacle Global, owner of Apex Financial. And every second you've spent humiliating me in this room has been recorded, logged, and now witnessed. Her revelation wasn't theatrical. It was factual, not designed for maximum dramatic effect, but for maximum clarity. It wasn't about shocking or shaming, but about establishing truth without qualification or ambiguity. Clients around the lounge stared, frozen. Vanessa's face lost its color. Gregory didn't move. Heather backed toward the wall. Raymond blinked like he'd seen a ghost. The collective reaction was telling, a mixture of shock, realization, and recalculation as the implications of her identity registered across different faces in different ways. Then it hit. The twist wasn't the reveal. It was the response. Clients started clapping, slowly, then all at once. The applause wasn't celebratory. It was affirmative. Acknowledgement not of entertainment, but of justice. Not of performance, but of necessary correction to a broken system. Jabari stepped forward. I knew I recognized you. Forbes cover, 2 years ago. Your company transformed this bank. His recognition added another layer of credibility. External verification of what Zara had claimed, independent confirmation of her identity and accomplishments. Aaliyah stood, tears in her eyes. She's our CEO. Her statement captured something profound. Not just recognition of title, but acknowledgement of representation. Not just corporate hierarchy, but meaningful leadership that reflected and included her own identity. Daehyun whispered, I should have recorded this part. His comment reflected shifting perspective, from documenting injustice to witnessing justice, from recording problem to capturing solution. Zara looked around the room, her voice no longer calm, now commanding. The problem wasn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is how you treated someone you thought didn't matter. Her statement went beyond the immediate situation to its broader implications, identifying not just what happened, but why it mattered, not just the specific case, but the general principle it revealed. Vanessa stammered, You set us up. Her accusation attempted to reframe accountability as entrapment, to cast Zara's intentional testing of the system as somehow unfair or deceptive rather than necessary and revealing. Zara answered, No, I tested you, and you failed. Her correction was important, distinguishing between entrapment, creating conditions for wrongdoing, and testing, creating conditions that reveal existing attitudes and behaviors. The distinction was ethical, not semantic. The entire room shifted, and from the corner of the lounge, the sound of sirens grew faint in the distance. Police were coming. But the real justice, it had already walked through the front door. Detain her now before she disappears. Vanessa Reynolds' voice cracked with desperation as she pointed at Zara, eyes wild, posture no longer composed but defensive. The tension in the executive client lounge snapped. Her command had lost all pretense of professional procedure, reduced to naked panic as the situation continued to slip beyond her control. The transformation from authority figure to desperate actor was complete. Raymond Collins, the security lead, stepped forward without hesitation, reaching for Zara's arm as if dragging her away would erase the last 5 minutes of truth. But Zara didn't move. She stood as if anchored to the floor itself. Touch me and you'll lose more than your job, she said. Not loud, but firm, steady, and absolute. Her warning wasn't threat, but promise, specific consequence for specific action, delivered. Not with emotion, but with certainty. It carried the weight not of anger, but of authority, legitimate and undeniable. Aaliyah Bennett stepped between them before Raymond's fingers could close. Back off, she shouted. You heard what she just said. She owns this place. Her intervention was physical and vocal, placing her body between threat and target, raising her voice in defense of someone who had maintained composure throughout. It was an act of solidarity that carried personal risk. Raymond hesitated. He glanced at Vanessa, then back at Zara. The growing uncertainty in his stance revealed the cracks beneath the uniform. His hesitation was telling. The moment when authority questions itself, when direction conflicts with instinct, when following orders no longer seems like sufficient justification to that moment. The double doors to the lounge swung open and 2 uniformed police officers entered. Their boots echoed across the polished floor. A hush swept over the room. Their arrival shifted the dynamic again, introducing new authority, new process, new potential outcomes. The presence of law enforcement raised both stakes and standards, transforming a private dispute into a potential legal matter. One officer, a white man in his 40s with a weathered expression, raised an eyebrow as his gaze met Zara's. We received a report of a fraud attempt. Can someone explain what's happening here? His question was professional, neutral, beginning with information gathering rather than action, with understanding rather than intervention. It represented proper procedure in contrast to what had preceded it. Heather Wilson stepped forward. Immediately, posture squared like she was proud of what she'd done. She's impersonating a high-net-worth client. She demanded $500,000 in cash with no verification. Her voice was sharp. This could be a federal-level theft. Her framing attempted to justify the escalation, presenting the situation in terms that would validate the extreme response. It was a strategic narrative designed to align law enforcement with her perspective before other facts could emerge. Zara didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply turned toward the officer and said, I'd like to make a statement, but not yet. Her response was measured, deliberate, acknowledging the officer's authority while also maintaining control of her own narrative. It wasn't defiance but strategy, not resistance but timing. Before the officer could respond, the sound of a soft, cracking voice broke through the silence. "They're lying." Every head turned. The unexpected intervention shifted attention again, introducing new perspective, new testimony, new dimension to what it seemed to contain situation. It was Tiana Morris, a 25-year-old black woman in a denim jacket seated quietly near the glass divider. She'd been silent until now, small in posture, unnoticed. Her presence had been overlooked, another example of the selective visibility that characterized this space. Until she spoke, she had been effectively invisible, present but unseen, there, but not acknowledged. "They did it to me too, 3 weeks ago," she said, standing slowly. "I came in to open a photography business account. Heather refused to process my EIN. She said we don't open accounts for freelancers with inconsistent histories." Her testimony transformed the narrative from isolated incident to pattern of behavior, from unusual occurrence to standard practice. It provided independent corroboration from an unexpected source, evidence of systemic rather than situational issues. Heather spun toward her. "That's not true." Her denial was immediate but unconvincing, the reflexive rejection of evidence rather than thoughtful engagement with it. It reflected panic rather than confidence, defensiveness rather than certainty. Tiana raised her phone. "I recorded it. Didn't post it. But it's time someone did." Her evidence was direct, undeniable. Not hearsay but documentation, not accusation but record. The existence of this recording transformed her testimony from claim to proof. Gasps echoed through the room. Raymond took a single step back. The collective reaction acknowledged the shifting ground. Recognition that what had been presented as procedure was now revealed as pattern. What had been framed as security was now exposed as discrimination. One of the police officers turned to Heather and asked, "Ma'am, did you make that call knowing she owns this bank?" His question was precise, targeted, focusing not on general procedure but specific knowledge, not on policy but on purpose. It reflected professional assessment of what truly mattered in this situation. Heather's face lost its color. She didn't own it at the time. She stammered. Her response was revealing. Not denial but deflection, not rejection of the premise but attempt to justify the action. It was, in its way, confirmation rather than refutation. Zara turned slowly. "I've owned it for over 2 years, which means what you just said is either a lie or a confession." Her observation was logically impeccable, identifying the binary nature of Heather's claim. Either she knew and lied about it, or she didn't know and just confessed to making assumptions without verification. Neither alternative was defensible. Daehyun lifted his phone again, but this time he didn't hit record. He just whispered. She didn't have to shout. She didn't need a camera. She is the camera now. His observation captured something profound about authentic authority, that it requires no amplification, that it carries its own weight, that it documents through presence rather than technology. Jabari Washington looked to the officers and said, "Gentlemen, I think you're witnessing the end of a system, one that protected people like Heather, Vanessa, and Trevor. And I think you know it too." His framing elevated the moment beyond individual accountability to systemic change, identifying this not as isolated incident, but as representative example, not as personal conflict, but as structural reckoning. The officer, who had spoken earlier, nodded slowly but noticeably. "We're not making any arrests, but we'll be filing a report. A complete one." His response reflected professional judgment, recognition that while no immediate law enforcement action was warranted, documentation of the incident was still necessary and appropriate. Priya Patel's voice came through on Zara's phone, calm and timely. "Zara, corporate has received the Tiana Morris complaint. It was buried." Heather flagged it as ineligible for review. "That violates Compliance Policy 4.3. Her update provided concrete evidence of procedural violation, specific policy, specific action, specific consequence. It transformed vague accusation into documented infraction." Zara nodded. "And Vanessa's role?" Her question was direct, specific, focused not just on immediate actor, but on supervisory responsibility, not just on action, but on oversight. Priya answered. She signed off on the rejection. The simple statement completed the chain of accountability, connecting individual action to managerial approval, isolated decision to systematic practice. Zara turned to Vanessa, whose defiance was giving way to panic. You told me to leave. You refused my ID. You called me a con artist. And now you want to hide behind Heather's flawed paperwork. Her summary was comprehensive, accurate, a cataloging of actions that could not be denied or reframed. It was accountability. In its most direct form. Vanessa's hands trembled. You dressed like you didn't belong here. I made a judgment call. Her justification revealed exactly what was at issue. The assumption that belonging could be determined by appearance, that worth could be assessed by attire, that identity could be verified by conformity to expectation. Zara stepped forward. That wasn't judgment. That was bias. Her correction was precise, distinguishing between professional assessment and personal prejudice, between evaluation based on evidence and rejection based on assumption. Trevor Whitman, still lingering at the edge of the crowd, scoffed. We're all being dramatic. I'm leaving. I've got better things to do. His attempted dismissal reflected privilege, the assumption that he could simply walk away from a situation that others were required to resolve, that his time was more valuable than the accountability being established. Aaliyah Davis shouted. No, you don't. You were part of this. Her challenge rejected his attempted exit, refusing to allow responsibility to walk out the door, insisting that participation required presence until resolution. Trevor snapped. You people are always so loud. His response revealed what simmered beneath the surface, the bias that had been coded in procedural language now emerging in its raw form. The mask had fully slipped, and just like that, the room boiled over. You people, Daehyun said. You mean the woman who owns the bank? His repetition of the phrase highlighted its significance, not letting the coded language pass unremarked, not allowing the bias to hide behind ambiguity. Jabari stepped between Trevor and the rest. Leave now, man. That card you wave around won't protect you from what just happened. His intervention was both physical and verbal, creating space between volatile elements while also naming the new reality. That status would no longer serve as shield against accountability. Trevor turned toward the door, but not before one of the officers said, Sir, we'll need your statement before you go. The officer's request transformed attempted exit into required presence. Procedural obligation replacing personal preference, civic responsibility overriding individual convenience. That he paused, then slowly sat down, defeated, his compliance reflected. The new power dynamic, recognition that his usual authority had been superseded, that his typical privileges had been suspended, that his accustomed exemptions no longer applied. Zara turned back to the police. I'd like to handle this in-house. No arrests. Not yet. I want people to speak. I want the room to understand what just happened here. Her preference wasn't for punishment, but for education. Not retribution, but reformation. Not penalty, but change. It reflected a vision of justice focused on transformation rather than transaction. Point one officer nodded. You sure about that? Completely. His question acknowledged the legitimacy of other options, recognizing that formal charges could be justified, that legal consequences could be pursued, that criminal process could be initiated. Zara affirmed. She turned to Tiana. You're brave. You should never have had to be. Her acknowledgement went beyond gratitude to recognition, identifying not just what Tiana had done, but what it had cost, not just her action, but the unjust necessity that prompted it. Tiana replied, I just wanted to open an account. That's all. Her simple statement captured the fundamental injustice at the heart of the situation, that basic services, routine transactions, normal activities required extraordinary courage and persistence from some clients, but not others. Zara placed her hand over her heart. And from today forward, you'll never be treated like that again. In fact, your account will be opened personally by the executive board, fee-free. You've earned that much. Her promise wasn't just personal, but institutional, not just individual. Accommodation, but systematic change, not just one-time exception, but permanent reformation. Jabari turned to Zara, voice warm. You didn't just stop a system. You exposed it. His observation identified what made this intervention different. Not just interruption, but illumination. Not just prevention, but revelation. Not just stopping harm, but starting healing. Zara looked at him, her voice low. And now I'm going to dismantle it. Her commitment went beyond the moment to its implications, beyond correction to reconstruction, beyond stopping wrong to building right, beyond ending harm to creating health. Behind her, Vanessa muttered to herself, eyes lost. This was never supposed to happen. Her statement reflected genuine shock, the disorientation of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged, whose assumptions had been profoundly disrupted, whose certainties had been irreparably damaged. Gregory stood beside her, quiet but not defensive. It was always going to happen. We just didn't think we'd get caught. His response was revelatory, acknowledging not mistake but method, not error but expectation, not accident but anticipation. It transformed the narrative from unfortunate incident to inevitable exposure. Raymond took a single step toward the exit. Zara raised a hand. Stay? You'll need to hear what comes next, because your name's on the file too. Her instruction was firm but fair, requiring presence but promising process, demanding accountability but offering clarity, insisting on responsibility but providing explanation. Aaliyah whispered to Daehyun, she's not just firing them. She's rewriting the rules. Her observation captured the scope of what was unfolding. Not just personnel change, but policy transformation. Not just staff replacement, but system reformation. Not just punitive action, but proactive restructuring. Prius' voice came back through the phone. Pinnacle compliance officers are arriving within 10 minutes. They've requested Zara lead the internal debrief, and they've approved full authority to act. Her update confirmed the institutional backing for what was occurring, that this wasn't rogue action but authorized intervention, not individual initiative but corporate mandate, not personal vendetta but professional necessity. Zara smiled faintly. Good, because I've been ready for this day longer than they know. Her response revealed preparation, not reaction, long-term strategy rather than short-term emotion, planned response rather than improvised solution. And with the lounge watching, clients, staff, officers, and a young woman named Tiana, the future of Apex Financial was no longer a question of policy. It was a matter of personal reckoning. Enough. Zara Okafor's voice didn't rise, but it silenced the entire room. The client lounge, once humming with tension and scattered disbelief, now stood still. Every client, every officer, every staff member held their breath. The simple word carried the weight of finality. Not just conclusion to conversation, but completion of a phase. Not just end of discussion, but beginning of consequence. She stepped forward, no longer seated, no longer patient. She wore no badge, no visible sign of title or ownership. Yet her presence now filled the entire space like the weight of a verdict. Her physical movement matched her verbal authority, standing fully in both her power and her purpose, occupying space not just physically but psychologically, commanding attention not through volume but through presence. For 15 minutes, I've endured slurs, suspicion, and slander inside a building that bears my company's name. So allow me to remove all doubt. Her summary was precise, comprehensive, cataloging not just what had occurred but what it represented, not just actions but attitudes, not just words but worldviews. She reached into her tablet case and pulled out a small black folder embossed with the gold Apex Financial logo. She opened it carefully and turned it toward the nearest officer and then to the room. Inside, a corporate ID, a notarized certificate, and a letter of authority signed by the board of directors. The physical evidence matched her verbal assertion. Tangible proof of intangible authority, material verification of institutional position, concrete confirmation of corporate control. My name is Zara Okafor. I am the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Global. I own 83% of Apex Financial, and starting today, I will no longer tolerate misconduct under this roof. Her declaration was complete, unambiguous, establishing not just identity but authority, not just position but purpose, not just ownership but intention. The reaction was instant. Vanessa's jaw dropped. Gregory took a step backward, face ashen. Heather staggered into a chair. Raymond's hands fell from his belt. Even Trevor Whitman, seated and stewing, leaned forward in stunned silence. The collective response reflected collective recognition. The moment when reality fully registers, when denial becomes impossible, when consequence becomes unavoidable. Priya's voice crackled through the phone, still connected. Zara has full termination authority as listed under Pinnacle Compliance Directive 4B. This conversation is being logged for HR verification. You may proceed, ma'am. Her confirmation added institutional weight to individual authority, transforming personal position into procedural power, individual decision into corporate action. Zara didn't smile. She simply turned and faced the staff directly. Vanessa Reynolds, you're fired, effective immediately, for racial bias, abuse of position, and obstruction of client services. Her statement was clear, specific, identifying both action and consequence, both infraction and penalty, both person and policy. It was accountability in its most direct form that Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her voice had carried so easily 15 minutes earlier. Now it trembled in retreat. The silence was telling. The absence of defense where defense had seemed so certain, the lack of response where response had seemed so ready, the failure of voice where voice had seemed so strong. Gregory Parker, you're fired, not just for complicity, but for standing silent while a client was profiled, accused, and humiliated. Her statement addressed not just action but inaction, not just commission but omission, not just what was done but what was allowed. It established that responsibility extends beyond direct participation to enabled permission. Gregory didn't argue. He simply lowered his head. His acceptance reflected recognition, acknowledgement of failure, acceptance of consequence, understanding of responsibility. Heather Wilson, Zara continued. You're terminated for knowingly fabricating a client risk report, triggering a false police call, and burying bias complaints. You broke the system from the inside. Her statement was comprehensive, detailed, cataloging not isolated incident, but pattern of behavior, not single action, but systematic subversion, not momentary lapse, but methodical misconduct. Heather let out a sharp breath, her composure breaking. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you. Her defense revealed exactly what was wrong. The assumption that mistreatment was acceptable if the target lacked power, that discrimination was problematic only when directed at the powerful, that bias was issue only when it affected the influential. Zara didn't flinch. And if it had been someone else? Her question cut to the heart of the matter, identifying not just what happened but why it mattered, not just the specific case but the general principle, not just the particular incident but the persistent pattern. Heather's lips parted. She stopped. There was no defense. Her silence was admission, recognition that the question itself contained its answer, that any response would only confirm the underlying problem, that no justification could address the fundamental issue. Raymond Collins, Zara said, turning. You're dismissed for aggression, unlawful detainment attempt, and failure to de-escalate. Her statement was direct, professional, focusing on actions rather than attitudes, on documented behavior rather than assumed motivation, on observable conduct rather than inferred intent. Raymond stood tall but didn't respond. He just turned and walked to the far end of the lounge like a man waiting for a bus to take him away from a cliff. His physical response matched his psychological state. Retreat rather than resistance, acceptance rather than argument, recognition rather than rejection. And Trevor Whitman, Zara said, voice colder. You're banned from all Pinnacle-affiliated institutions, effective immediately, for harassment, racism, and documented misconduct. Her statement addressed not just employee but client, establishing that standards apply universally, that accountability extends beyond staff to customers, that values govern relationships in all directions. Trevor jumped up. You can't ban me. I'm worth more to this bank than half the people in here. His protest revealed exactly what was at issue, the assumption that financial worth translated to moral worth, that economic value conferred ethical exemption, that material assets justified immaterial harm. Aaliyah shouted from the side. Not today, you're not. Her response rejected not just his claim, but his framework, challenging not just his specific value, but his value system, not just his particular worth, but his concept of worth itself. Zara raised her hand calmly. We don't build institutions to serve the loudest ego. We build them to protect the quiet dignity of the people who walk in expecting fairness. Her statement went beyond the immediate situation to fundamental purpose, articulating not just what was wrong, but what was right. Not just what must end, but what must begin. Not just what was being rejected, but what was being affirmed. The room erupted in applause. Not the kind that's performative or polite, but the kind that carries years of pent-up injustice in its rhythm. The response was genuine, spontaneous, recognition not of entertainment, but of truth, not of performance, but of authentic leadership, not of spectacle, but of necessary change. Jabari Washington stood with a quiet nod. That, he said, was justice in real time. His observation captured something profound about what had unfolded. Not justice delayed or justice denied, but justice delivered. Not justice promised or justice planned, but justice practiced. Not justice theorized or justice theologized, but justice realized. Tiana Morris, still standing off to the side, had tears in her eyes. I thought I'd never be seen. Not really. Her statement revealed the deeper impact of what had occurred, beyond policy to personhood, beyond procedure to presence, beyond transaction to transformation. It was about recognition in its fullest sense. Zara looked at her, her voice softening. You weren't just seen today, you were believed. Her response acknowledged what truly mattered. Not just visibility but validity, not just acknowledgement but affirmation, not just presence but participation. It was about the fundamental human need to be not just noticed but known. Just as the officers began to exit, Heather suddenly spoke. Her voice cracked, small and raw. Wait. The unexpected intervention shifted attention again, introducing new possibility, new direction, new potential for what might follow. The room quieted again. I need to say something. Her statement reflected recognition of moment, understanding. That what happened next mattered. That opportunity for truth was present. That space for honesty was available. Zara turned, her expression unchanged. Speak. Her permission was simple but profound, offering opportunity without promise, platform without prediction, chance without commitment. It was open but not obligated, receptive but not required. Heather took a breath, so deep it shook her shoulders. I buried 9 complaints in the last year. All of them came from women of color. I flagged them as duplicates, unverifiable, or outside policy windows. I did it to keep our numbers clean. Gregory knew. I told him. He told me to do what I had to. Her confession was detailed, specific, not general acknowledgement, but particular admission, not vague recognition, but precise revelation, not abstract acceptance, but concrete disclosure. That a gasp rippled through the lounge. Gregory didn't look up. The collective response acknowledged the significance of what had been revealed, recognition that what had appeared as isolated incident was confirmed as systematic practice. What had seemed like momentary lapse was exposed as methodical policy. Zara turned to Priya. Can you confirm that? Her question reflected proper process, seeking verification rather than assuming accuracy, requesting confirmation rather than accepting claim, pursuing evidence rather than presuming. Truth. Priya's voice returned without hesitation. Confirmed. We've located those complaint records and audio files. Heather's voice is on 3 of them. Gregory's signature is on 5. Her verification transformed accusation into fact, moving from claim to confirmation, from assertion to evidence, from allegation to documentation. Heather sat down, shaking. I didn't know how to stop. I thought if I didn't follow, I'd be next. Her explanation reflected common rationalization, the fear that justifies participation, the self-protection that enables harm to others, the personal security that compromises. Collective justice. Zara approached slowly, her tone measured. You weren't a follower. You were the one holding the torch while others burned. But today I'm putting that fire out. Her response rejected the attempted abdication of responsibility, refusing to accept fear as justification, to treat following orders as exculpation, to allow self-protection as explanation for harm to others. Heather didn't respond. She wept quietly into her hands. Her reaction reflected recognition, understanding of consequence, acceptance of responsibility, acknowledgement of harm. It was not performance, but processing, not show but shock, not demonstration but realization. Zara turned back to the rest of the room. For those still standing in this lounge, staff, clients, officers, and guests, I want you to understand something. Ownership isn't just a legal document or a title. It's a responsibility. And my responsibility is to make sure this never happens again. Not here. Not on my watch. Her statement elevated the moment beyond the particular to the universal, beyond specific incident to general principle, beyond immediate action to ongoing commitment, beyond present intervention to future transformation. Priya's voice followed once more, steady. Corporate has initiated full disciplinary review and operational audit for the branch. Zara, the floor is yours to lead reform. Her update confirmed institutional backing, transforming individual action into organizational initiative, personal intervention into corporate commitment, isolated incident into systematic change. Zara looked around the room at Jabari, Aliyah, Tiana, Daehyun, the clients who had rallied, the strangers who had stayed silent but now looked changed. Her gaze was inclusive, comprehensive, acknowledging all present, recognizing all perspectives, honoring all participants in what had unfolded and what would follow. Then let's begin. Because this bank no longer answers to people like Vanessa. It answers to the people it was built to serve. Her statement established new direction, not just ending what was wrong, but beginning what was right, not just removing what had failed, but creating what could succeed, not just closing a chapter, but opening a new one. And with those words, the door to reform didn't just open. It stayed open, wide enough for the future to walk through with dignity. Zara didn't wait for the applause to fade. The moment the firings were done and Heather's confession still echoed in the air, she turned to the stunned room and said, "This isn't just about what they did. It's about what we're going to do now." Her focus shifted from past to future, from accountability to action, from consequence to construction, from justice served to justice sustained. It reflected leadership that understood punishment without reformation achieves little. She walked to the center of the executive lounge, standing beside a cream leather chair that had once symbolized prestige. But today it was just a seat among many. The symbolism was subtle but significant, rejecting hierarchy for community, privilege for participation, exclusivity for inclusivity. It reflected a vision of banking as service rather than status, as facilitation rather than filtration. Effective immediately, all branch operations are paused, she said, her voice steady but urgent. No new transactions, no account actions, no client meetings until we reset what this institution stands for. Her decision was decisive, dramatic, recognizing that continuation without correction would only perpetuate problem, that business. As usual was precisely what needed to change, that interruption was necessary for intervention. The clients didn't groan. They nodded. Some even clapped. Their response reflected recognition, understanding that temporary inconvenience was worth lasting improvement, that present pause would yield future progress, that momentary disruption would enable meaningful development. We are launching the Apex Equity Program today, not next quarter, and we're doing it right here in this room. This branch will be the first test site for verbal audits, active diversity accountability, and a face-to-face values pledge for every single staff member who wants to remain employed. Her plan was specific, structured, not vague promise but concrete program, not general goal but specific strategy, not abstract aim but actionable approach. It reflected leadership that understood. Good intentions require good implementations. Priya's voice came through on speaker now, projected from Zara's tablet. I've drafted the documentation. Internal ethics officers will arrive within the hour. Corporate has signed off. Her update confirmed preparedness, revealing that what appeared spontaneous was actually strategic, that what seemed reactive was actually planned, that what looked like improvisation was actually implementation of existing design. Aliyah raised her hand, voice cracking with hope. What's a verbal audit? Her question reflected genuine interest, not skepticism but curiosity, not challenge but engagement, not doubt but desire to understand. It was the beginning of participation in what had been proposed. Zara turned to her gently. It means we don't just check numbers. We track words. What's said, what's omitted, and who's treated like a burden just for walking through the door. Her explanation was clear, accessible, translating technical concept into human terms, procedural mechanism into practical meaning, systematic tool into understandable purpose. Jabari nodded. That changes everything. His response acknowledged significance, recognition that transformation of language precedes transformation of culture, that monitoring of words influences modification of behaviors, that attention to communication shapes evolution of community. Daehyun whispered. That makes it human. His observation captured the fundamental shift from finance as transaction to finance as interaction, from banking as process to banking as relationship, from institution as system to institution as society. Zara smiled faintly. That's the point. Her confirmation was simple but profound, acknowledging that humanization was not byproduct but purpose, not accident but intention, not side effect but central aim. Just then, in the silence that followed, a sound broke through that no one expected. Raymond Collins, the fired security lead, clearing his throat. Everyone turned. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. The unexpected intervention shifted attention again, introducing new voice, new perspective, new possibility for what might unfold. I need to say something, he said, hands loose at his sides. I didn't just fail to stop what happened. I helped plan it. His confession was direct, unambiguous, claiming not just passive complicity, but active participation, not just failure to prevent, but contribution to design, not just negligence, but intention. The air shifted. Zara's expression sharpened, but she didn't speak. Her restraint was strategic, allowing space for truth to emerge, for testimony to unfold, for confession to complete without interruption or influence. Raymond continued. Heather came to me 2 months ago. She said corporate was investigating for noncompliance, and that Vanessa had a plan to bury the red flags. My job was to make sure anyone who complained got quietly removed from the space before it turned into paperwork. His revelation was detailed, specific, not general admission but particular explanation, not vague acknowledgement but precise description, not abstract acceptance but concrete disclosure. The room was dead quiet. The silence reflected collective processing, absorption of information, assessment of implications, adjustment of understanding as what had appeared as isolated incident was confirmed as coordinated strategy. She said, "The less we document, the less we explain." So I followed it. I flagged certain clients as elevated risk based on how they looked, how they asked questions, whether they challenged fees. His disclosure was comprehensive, honest, revealing. Not just what was done, but how it was done. Not just general approach, but specific criteria. Not just vague system, but detailed methodology. Aaliyah's face darkened. That's profiling. Her naming was direct, accurate, identifying not just practice, but principle, not just action, but framework, not just behavior, but system. It refused euphemism in favor of clarity. Raymond nodded. It was. I knew it. I did it anyway. His admission was complete, unqualified, accepting not just action, but awareness, not just behavior, but knowledge, not just what was done, but understanding of what it was. He looked at Zara. You gave me a job. I turned it into a shield for the wrong people. His acknowledgement reflected genuine remorse, recognition not just of harm done, but of trust betrayed, not just of rules broken, but of responsibilities abandoned, not just of policies violated, but of purposes perverted. Priya's voice came in again, calm but firm. Zara, we've located 4 compliance reports that were altered after escalation. Raymond's name is on all of them. Her verification transformed claim into confirmation, moving from assertion to evidence, from allegation to documentation, from statement to substantiation. Raymond didn't argue. I deserve to be held accountable, but I didn't come clean to save myself. I came clean because watching you stand in this room and say what you said, I realized I've never worked for someone I respected before. His explanation reflected genuine transformation, not strategic contrition, but authentic recognition, not calculated cooperation, but honest acknowledgement, not self-serving confession, but truth-serving disclosure. Zara didn't soften. You nearly got me arrested. You intimidated people who came here in good faith, and now you want grace. Her response was direct, challenging, refusing easy absolution, rejecting premature reconciliation, requiring full recognition of harm before consideration of healing. Raymond shook his head. I want consequence, and I'll take it. But I also want you to know there's more. Heather wasn't acting alone. There's a list, a private tag in the CRM system used to mark problem clients. And that list, it's longer than you think. His disclosure continued to expand. revealing not just personal involvement, but systematic practice, not just individual actions, but institutional patterns, not just isolated incidents, but integrated approach. Priya replied instantly. I'll pull it now. We'll freeze access and start a forensic review. Her response reflected systematic approach to systematic problem, matching methodology to matter, process to problem, system to situation. Zara turned to the room. This is why we reform. Not tomorrow, not at a retreat. Right here in this space where silence let bias grow. Today we root it out. Her commitment was immediate, located. Not future promise, but present practice. Not distant pledge, but immediate process. Not abstract intention, but concrete implementation. Clients began to clap, not because they were relieved, but because they were ready. Their response reflected recognition, understanding that meaningful change requires active participation, that sustainable transformation needs community support, that lasting reform demands collective commitment. Aliyah stepped beside Zara. Let us help. Her offer reflected transition from observer to participant, from witness to contributor, from audience to ally, from beneficiary to builder of the change being created. Zara nodded. We'll do it together, starting with truth. Her acceptance was both philosophical and practical, acknowledging both the necessity of collaborative effort and the foundation of transparent process, both the who and the how of meaningful change. And the room, once poisoned by silence, began to transform with voices raised, with truths confessed, and with a culture finally cracked wide open for light to enter. The change was palpable, visible, atmosphere shifting from tense to purposeful, from defensive to constructive, from conflicted to committed as shared understanding created shared direction. That if this story moved you, if you've ever been questioned, dismissed, or denied your rightful place, remember that your dignity isn't determined by others' perceptions. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't volume, but unwavering truth. Click that subscribe button, share this journey with someone who needs to hear it, and join our community where stories like Zara's, and possibly yours, find both voice and validation. Because real change begins when we stand our ground with grace and refuse to let others define our worth.